The press seem to love writing about young people these days, whether they're quitting lucrative jobs, they're too easily offended, they're banning voicemail, apparently. They're snowflakes that can't handle work. They've ruined Club 18 to 30 holidays. They were good. They're wreaking havoc with their spending. They don't have enough sex, maybe explains the holidays. They've ditched engagement rings. They're mollycoddled, entitled, and spoiled. They don't go to the beach enough. They campaign against the wrong things, ask Greta. And finally, my favorite, they have way too much avocado on toast. Today, I'm going to talk about how these lies and misconceptions, specifically around money, work, and power, are really limiting the opportunities for young people. Throughout history, there's been a kind of common consensus that each generation has a duty and obligation to leave the world in a better position for their children. And largely, you can see that's happened. Each generation has left the world in a better place for their children. You can see a rise in living standards. But something could be about to change. Today's young people are the first young people that are going to grow up to be poorer than their parents. Today, I'm going to talk about this issue of intergenerational fairness, how baby boomers broke that contract, and what we need to do to get it back. But how did I come to get here? Well, I'm no social justice warrior. I'm no activist. In fact, I'm kind of the opposite. I help big brands advertise towards 16 to 24-year-olds. Rather than be an expert in the social issues these young people face, I'm really good at getting them to change which toothpaste provider they use. But where I work, my agency is very different. There's 6 of us in head office, but over 150 young people that work for us alongside their studies. I'm constantly bowled away by their creativity, resilience, and determination. And it's these young people that have kind of informed me about this issue of intergenerational fairness. To start off with some generational definitions. I'm going to use this one. There's loads of different ones. They tweak slightly. It doesn't matter too much. The one that I'll change is the latest generation. You've probably heard as Gen Z. And the graph shows some key historic events and their impact on birth rates. So the big first grey spike is the end of the First World War. The big green spike is the end of the Second World War. And the bit in the middle is the silent generation, so called because there just weren't that many of them, born in the 30s, in the Depression, and the Second World War. And you see each generation is different in terms of size. And this is really important. I want to take on a couple of stereotypes and just see where the truth is. The first one is this Generation EasyJet narrative, that young people consume too much. They spend loads of money on lavish lifestyles and they don't save enough compared to back in the day. And what happens when you actually look at the data here is you can see young adult workers, so kind of 18 to 24-year-olds, and those approaching retirement have had roughly the same spending habits when you get rid of the cost of housing since the 60s. So during the good times, both have gone up together. During the bad times, both have been hit at the same rate. What's happened in the last 5 years is slightly different, and those older workers have continued to advance their expensive consumption, and younger workers have stayed the same. So actually today, young workers spend 15 to 18% less than older workers. So actually, the people going off having these lavish holidays are the boomers. This is going to get awkward. Know your audience. So there's other kind of issues around money. One of the things that boomers will actually say to us in response is the way that money passes between generations has changed. So historically, boomers accrued a lot of wealth through property. And now inheritance is going to make a big difference to our generation because we're set to essentially earn quite a lot of it. Thank you. But this creates 2 real problems. Firstly, inequality. So our society is going to grow up to be way less equal if we rely on inheritance. 50% of the country is going to get a massive helping hand, while 50% of the country get nothing. Secondly, if you're looking for that inheritance to help you buy your first house, Gen Z today are going to receive their inheritance when they're in their late 60s. So it's not that useful. And the future of tax doesn't look too good for young people either. This is the forecast cost of the welfare state. As you can see, education, social security look pretty consistent, but the cost of healthcare is going to rise massively. And unless we drastically change the way that we fund our welfare state, the cost of this is going to sit with young people. Next stereotype, job hoppers. I think we've all heard this one. Young people are fickle, they don't stay in the job long enough, they're not tough enough, they don't stick with things. I reckon if you polled every single graduate recruiter in the country, they'd all be furious at the amount of times that young people quit perfectly good jobs. And again, there is some truth in this. Young people are more likely to change jobs than older people. Kind of makes sense. They're probably trialing a new industry, or they've maybe moved to a new area. There's lots of variables. Older people are going to be more settled and less likely to change jobs. But if you compare a 21-year-old today with their parents when their parents were 21, that 21-year-old is actually 25% less likely to change jobs. Now, that might sound kind of unimportant, but we live in a world of stagnated salaries. So the quickest way to get a pay rise is actually to change jobs. Every time you change jobs, you get 7% pay rise. So this stereotype and narrative that we're peddling at our young people that they need to stick with jobs is costing them money. There's other problems in the world of work as well. There's been a marked decline in unemployment, which is really good. But the reason for that is for a massive increase in certain sectors that have recruited more young people, mainly leisure, basic services, and the caring sectors. These are the jobs that offer the worst salaries and the least security. If you compare it to the sectors that are increasing their recruitment of older people, it's financial services and the professional services. Next up, we've all heard this one, keyboard warriors. I'm going to get into politics now. Bear with me. So we've all heard this. Young people don't vote, so they don't get the politicians they want. If they spent a little bit less time on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, or even this thing called TikTok, apparently, then there'd be more time campaigning in real life than they'd get the politicians that reflect their views. And I think this is really important. This has developed into a representation problem. 10, 15 years ago, the best way to predict how someone would vote or their social outlook to things like migration or rights was based on class. If you're middle or upper class, you're going to vote Tory. If you're working class or poor, you're going to vote Labour. Now, these are our recent election results in December. You can see that age is now the biggest predictor for how people vote. And this is the same for Brexit and every single issue when it comes to politics and society. For every 10 years older a voter gets, they're 9 points more likely to vote Tory. In December, the cut-off point, as in the tipping point where they're more likely to vote Tory than Labour, was 39. Interestingly, if you go back to Corbyn's election in 2017, where he did a little bit better, the tipping point was 47. So we spent a lot of time analysing the fact that Corbyn didn't win in the Midlands and the North, but not much time analysing how he lost out to the 39 to 47-year-old vote. And again, there's some basis in these stats and these stereotypes, right? Young people are less likely to vote, but there's something else at play here. They get penalised for being part of a small cohort. Democracy is a numbers game, right? Let's take a scenario where only 54-year-olds and 18-year-olds are allowed to vote in the UK, right? The 54-year-olds, there's currently 936,000 54-year-olds in the country. There's only 720,000 18-year-olds. So it doesn't matter if the 18-year-olds are slightly less likely to vote. They're never going to get the way because the 54-year-olds have it in numbers. And if I was a smart politician, I'd be creating my policies for the 54-year-olds, not the 18-year-olds. I think there's a bigger problem here with power. In every single application process, we prioritize experience above all else. Think of the CV. It means that there's no young people working in any positions of power, whether it's in politics, media, or the business. So it's fair to say I've painted quite a bleak picture. Young people today are going to grow up to be poorer than their parents, working in poorly paid, unstable jobs without the power to affect change. But I do think there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Around the world, there's been a movement, whether it's in Hong Kong with civil rights, against guns in America, or a certain Swede that's tearing up the climate emergency. Young people are passionate, they are engaged, and they are picking up issues that they see. The trouble is, this topic of intergenerational justice is very complicated and hidden in graphs. Pictures of Australian outback burning or mourning parents outside American schools create emotion in the media. My graphs do not. And I first discovered this at an economics conference. I've never seen a bunch of 65-year-old white middle-class men so united in a prognosis that didn't benefit them. They all agreed young people are screwed, but the data is complicated behind the scenes. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to start talking about youth in the same way that we talk about class or social mobility. We need to lobby our politicians for a radical transfer of power, money, and opportunities to young people. And finally, we could do with our media writing better stories. Thank you.